This is a mission-focused life with Tim Olafson, co-founder and executive director of Another Child Foundation. Up next, Tim will speak with this week's special guest, offering special insights on how you can live a mission-focused life.
Hey, this week's guest, we're going to have Rusty Boruff. He is the founder and executive director of a ministry called 180. That ministry is located in Davenport, Iowa, and they do some awesome work, and we're excited to be chatting with Rusty today. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate it.
Hey, we got to know each other, I know, through the connection at Calvary Church of the Quad Cities through Pastor Tim Bowman. A few years ago, I think we were both receiving some support. So Another Child Foundation is an organization that I represent. And I don't know if you were still on staff at that point or not.
Yeah, I think I was. And I think I was right at the end, transitioning, to 180 full time. So I think that was right at the very end that we were able to make that connection.
Yeah. So I heard so many good things about the work that you guys are doing, and I've seen you've had some pretty, I don't want to say explosive growth, but you've grown pretty quickly over, I think, 10 years. We'll get into that a little bit. A little bit of your history of your ministry, but doing some awesome things, and we're just glad to have you on and sharing some of those inspirational stories that you have, both through your personal life to start with, and then as you see happening into people today. But tell us a little bit more about Rusty, who you are, and things like that.
So on a personal note, a lot of people, and you know how it is in ministry, a lot of people want to just associate you with the organization that you're part of. But I do have a personal life as well. So I'm married to my wife, Brooke. We've been married for 7 years now. Met at church. Her story is a complete opposite of mine. So mine is filled with a lot of bad decisions and horrible experiences. And hers is, growing up in church. She's been at the same church, her whole life, Calvary. And that's where I started going to church after I got saved and met her. And she definitely wasn't interested in me at first. I had to, I was kind of that in the church world, that new guy that walks in the door who, just got out of jail, and her parents are, may not want to talk to him. Let's see how he works out. Is this Jesus thing for real? And, but I actually used her one-legged grandma who was going through some health issues in a hospital, and I was visiting her, and I asked her grandma for Brooke's phone number so I could reach out to my wife. So I'm not ashamed of that, but I have 3 kids. Tannen, who is 13, he's my 13-year-old, and then we have a almost 4-year-old Zeke, and almost 2-year-old daughter named Everly. So
Nice.
And we live in Coal Valley, and very blessed to be in a good spot personally with my family, and so yeah.
That's very good. Yeah, it's kind of good too. So you grew up in the area then? You grew up
I grew up in a small town called Aledo, which some people may know. It's about 45 minutes south of the Quad Cities, so very small town. I actually grew up even out in the country in a smaller town of maybe 15 or 16 homes called Burgess, Illinois. And so we'd always come up to we call it the cities, which was the Quad Cities.
Yeah.
Now, if I say the cities, since I live in the Quad Cities, people think I'm talking about Chicago or someplace like that. But I rarely came up to the Quad Cities growing up, but now it's definitely home.
Yeah, well, very good. So within this podcast, basically what we're trying to do is we try to share some inspirational stories. And I know you have one, but it's really about missions. And so what we want people to try to think of missions is not something they put on their calendar and do, but it's more of a mindset. It's more of something we do each and every day. We live a mission-focused life rather than deciding that on Tuesday I'm going to try to do mission. So anyway, I wanted you to kind of define, we ask all of our guests to do this, is how would you define the word mission?
So I think for me, I would define it with another word, being purpose. When I first became a Christian, we'll get into my story later, but I was a felon. And so the only job that I could really find was roofing. And I remember my boss, who was a Christian. He told me once. He said, your purpose here on earth is to show the world what Jesus would look like if he was a commercial roofer. And I remember thinking about that. I'm like, you know what? That is my purpose. It's not about, I knew I was always called to ministry, want to do, 180 and something like that. But I at first I, was a commercial roofer, and that's what I did. And so my mission at that time, my purpose at that time, was to show the world what Jesus would look like if he was a commercial roofer. And that's always stuck with me,
Yeah.
because I think in every area of your life, whether you're, my dad was, a construction worker. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and her job was to show, the world and her family what Jesus would look like if Jesus was a stay-at-home parent.
Mhm.
And so I think that's, for me, when I think of mission, you could define it a whole lot of ways, and I'm sure you get a lot of awesome answers. But for
Mhm.
me personally, when I look at mission, um, whether it's actually serving, like right now, my job is to show the world what Jesus would look like if, he worked at 180 Ministries,
Yeah.
and but every person is living a different experience in life and different jobs and careers. And so for me, I guess that's how I would define it.
Yeah.
The purpose in life, what you do, and showing the world what Jesus will look like if he was in your job, your situation.
Yeah. I love that. I've always thought of, in a little bit more broader terms, is, as you go to work as a salesman or a contractor, whatever, you could, I don't know, it's just different. I love the way you stated
Yeah.
that, as far as what would Jesus look like if he was a commercial roofer. I love that.
Yeah.
So
And
very
it
good.
just brings it home. It's personal, brings it home.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So, well, okay, so let's get back into your story a little bit.
yeah,
So yeah, just tell us a little bit about your history. I know, you've shared
sure.
that with me, and
Yeah.
you're open to that. So feel free to share how
Yeah.
you got to the point to where you needed God, and
Hmm.
then we'll talk a little bit about that defining moment. So
Yeah, no, definitely. Growing up, I grew up in a small town, small church, denominational church. And my first, I guess, my experiences with God were kind of two things. One was, growing up in a small church. It was very rules based, and so I never really understood or heard, or maybe I did, I ignored it, about God's grace. So all I heard was like the rules of following Jesus. Um, and then when I was like 10, 11, 12, I had a very close friend of mine. We played baseball together, which is all I did as a kid, was hunt and play baseball. And Evan was a kid that was always by my side. We played baseball all the time. And he was in an ATV accident one day, and my mom picked me up from school, and she told me that Evan had passed away.
mm,
And I just remember that wrecking my world, and thinking to myself, and on the way home from the funeral, I remember sitting in the back. I don't have a ton of memories as a kid, but I remember sitting back in my parents' vehicle on the way back from the funeral, and I was just bawling my eyes out. And I remember asking the question, how could God allow this to happen? Why would God take my best friend, who had so much life to live and was just such a good kid?
mhm,
And from that moment on, I think I just started out of a nature of rebellion, being upset, mad, um, all through junior high. Drugs, alcohol, just getting in trouble constantly. Small town, so reputation follows you. And then at that point, all the way through high school, I didn't feel like I could live up to those rules, and had already broken all those rules I heard about in church. So God just was not even a concept to me. And high school, ended up signing up for the military my junior year. So was in the military for about 4 years. Out of high school, I worked as a private investigator, traveled the country. Absolutely amazing job at age 18, 19.
well,
I mean, literally, I was just in the back of a van spying on people with a camera. Like, how awesome is that?
yeah,
As
yeah,
a 18, 19 year old. And so I had some really awesome experiences, but I couldn't shake some of the drugs and that lifestyle. Eventually it just caught up to me and ended up homeless in Springfield, Missouri, which is uniquely kind of tagged as the Christian capital of America, but there I was not living any Christian principles, and ended up coming back home, still hooked on drugs, broke a lot of laws, ended up in jail, spent about a year of my life there. And that's really where my introduction to Jesus came from a guy named Merle who worked or volunteered with the Gideons, and older gentleman there every Sunday. He was probably upper 80s, 90s. He wasn't like the most dynamic speaker in the world. He wasn't like, that's not a joke. Sometimes he would actually fall asleep while he was talking to me. Like literally we would be talking in a Bible study and just fall asleep. And I'm like, did he die? Is he, I don't know if medication or old age or what, but I share that to show you that he was just a normal Joe, just loved Jesus and had a purpose and a mission to go into that jail. And, but that was, for me, one, it showed me that God could forgive me. Second thing was it showed me that someone believed in Rusty. And that's what I needed in that moment. I needed someone to believe in me. And so while I was in jail, that's where the dream of 180 came. The simple goal of, I would see a bunch of guys who would come into jail, say they wanted to change, but they would get out of jail and go back right into the same circumstances. And it's hard to get clean when you're in a mud puddle. And that's what I realized. We had to create a safe environment for men and women who really wanted to change to go to, so they had that opportunity. And so that's really where the concept of 180 came, was sitting in jail. I spent all my time going to Bible studies, reading, praying, and really writing out, I still have all the papers from 15 years ago when I was in jail, of writing out what I saw 180 of being someday. And got out of jail, being a felon, very difficult, roofed, as I mentioned just a little bit ago. And then about a couple years later, 2010, I had the opportunity to kind of get into ministry and start 180. And that's how it all started.
Yeah. So when you say 180, I mean, basically that gets to the concept of like repentance is basically turning totally 180 degrees away from what's right in front of you, turn and really go a whole different direction.
Yeah.
So,
it's I wish I could tell you I picked that name because it does fit, right? But it was actually when I was at Calvary. I worked at Calvary for a couple of years as an outreach pastor, and had this dream. All we had when we started, we didn't have a nonprofit. Me and a couple of buddies, we bought a trailer for $500 and started housing people in the trailer. And I was still roofing at the time. And Pastor Tim Bowman came to me and he said, "Hey, we used to have this youth group called the 180 Zone, but we don't have anymore, but we actually have our own nonprofit for it." And he's like, "You could turn this into a nonprofit organization. Would you like our nonprofit called the 180 Zone, and we'll switch all the paperwork over?" And we did. And so that's how we got the name, the 180 Zone. Mm-hmm. And so it's actually, I wish I had a cool story about how we came up with the name, like God spoke it to me, or I don't. We just inherited the name, but it fits, and we changed it to 180 with that representation of repentance, of going from here to here, of changing that lifestyle. So
yeah. One of the things you said, and I've seen this with a lot of people that I fall into, is they want to change. And they so I guess my question would be to you is, how do you decide who is somebody who really wants to change versus somebody who just wants to change? I know it comes down to actions rather than words, but because I'm sure there's a lot of people that could get involved in your program, but I'm sure there's some people that aren't suited for it at this time, or what?
It's $1 million question right there, my friend. So when you look at 180, there's three things we do: prevent, reach, develop. Prevents all our school-based initiatives, work in our schools, high poverty, high crime rate schools. Reach, community outreach. Third is develop. That's our residential program. What we do is we take men and women who addictions, homeless, domestic abuse, incarceration, and create that safe environment, as I spoke earlier, for them to come to. 14-month program, very structured, very difficult. So the question is, how do you get people in there? and get the right people. And that's what we focus on. We are a homeless shelter. We take, of course, we're a Christian-based organization. We take people who really want to change, and we identify those people. Half of our staff are former graduates or people with former addictions themselves. So it helps just having that experience. When we're sitting down with someone, we can kind of tell, does this person really want to change or not? For us, it's not about whether they, use heroin yesterday or not. It's about how honest and real they are. I'll never forget a conversation with a guy in my office years ago. Came in and he said point blank, I love crack more than I love my kids. That's a heavy,
Yeah.
that's a real statement. And that's a guy who to me wants to change because he's being honest. He didn't want to love crack more than his kids, but he just loved crack more than his kids. And he showed it in his life. And so those are the types of real conversations. Look, you used heroin yesterday, you got drunk, we'll deal with that later. Do you really want to change? And so we look for small things. There's certain questions that we ask in our application, like, where's your favorite bar? Who's your crack dealer? I don't really care who your crack dealer is, but if you're answering that question, it tells me that you're done, that you're ready to, put the pipe down and move on. And so if they skip that question or they say, we literally will have people write in it, not telling you the information.
Yeah.
To me, that's a sign that you just ain't ready yet.
Yeah.
So some of it's just intuition and experience. Other times it's very specific questions that we're looking for.
Yeah. So do you work on spiritual transformation as much as their physical and their addictions and things?
Yeah. So when we look at our program, a major part of this program is the spiritual concept. And so every week in our program, 30 hours a week is devoted to Bible studies, to classes. Now, some of them might be like life skills classes, like money management, but it's, what does the Bible say about money management? It's about parenting, but how do you parent in a godly, perspective, godly way? They have to be going to church, and there's certain churches we transport them to. And so from this, we also do things like Genesis Process, Ultimate Journey, which are heavily spiritually Christian-based counseling materials that take, almost 30 some weeks to go through, So these are very, so when they come here, I always call it a poor man's Bible college, because there's more discipleship in classes that happen here than, any person would get in their small group or their house or even at a, seminary.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we rely heavily on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the thing that interests me is I love prevention, because when we work in Romania, we work with orphans there. And sometimes that's trying to help the kids who are already in that situation. So I love your idea of preventing. So tell us a little bit more about what you're doing in the local schools to kind of help
Yeah.
these kids prevent from getting to the situations where they need to overcome an addiction or something.
Yeah. No, that's, and so when I first started 180, in that jail, I mean, the idea of working with kids was never even a thought. I don't even really like kids, like, I don't mean that a bad way. I love my kids, but like, I never had the goal of like running a small group of kids or something.
Right.
But in 2000 and probably 13, 14, 3 or 4 years after we started, we realized that, this is always going to be an issue, addiction and homelessness, incarceration, criminal thinking. But is there a way that we can prevent people from ever actually entering our doors? And the idea, what we noticed was a large portion of people were coming from lower income areas and with high crime rates. And so what can we do to prevent a guy or a girl from ever entering our residential program and needing our services? So we started our prevention stuff, and a lot of it's all just a partnership with the school. Pre-COVID, 1,500 plus kids and their families every month that we were working with in school food pantries, athletics, after school programs, one called Quest for Christ, um, lice treatment, bed bug treatment, cockroach treatment, furniture deliveries, all these different things that we do as an organization that is working inside the school system. So it's a partnership with our local schools. So it's a great opportunity for churches to work through 180 to get into our public school system and take care of some of these social service needs while also being able to serve and share Christ with the kids. So it's very unique how we do it, but it's been working.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I mean, whenever nonprofits are basically, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to put ourselves out of business by solving these
exactly.
problems. Of
No,
course,
that
we know that's probably
exactly.
not going to happen. There's always going to be
Yeah.
these, evil is always going to be in the world, and um,
Yeah.
things are going to come up. But our goal is to work ourselves out of needing 180 to be,
Yeah.
a presence right there in Davenport.
You're
Do you have a
exactly right.
story? Do you have a story of one person that you could share, that, even if you don't use their name, one person that it was just an amazing story that you just love to
Mhm.
share with people on overcoming?
Yeah.
And maybe it's
So I
yourself.
always go, yeah, yeah. I already shared that one. I get tired of telling that one. I know. Um, I always go back to on the developed side, working with our residents. So I always share the story of Chuck Hensley. So when we first started, of course, we didn't we rented a house. I lived in the house with the guys for the first 4 years of the ministry. I lived with the guys. We had just 6 or 7 guys at that time. But one of our first ended up being graduates. His name was Chuck Hensley, and he called me. He was living in Davenport in a trailer, had a lot of addiction issues, getting kicked out of his place, needed a place to go, and so he came into our program, and he was a handful. He was a challenge. He actually threw a glass at my head once, but a lot of anger issues, a lot of struggles, but we worked through it, and it was amazing to watch kind of that transformation. Really, when he started getting connected with the church and making a church home, is where Chuck thrived. He went to barber school. He was a cook by nature, and so he had all these different experiences. Um, and he met a lady at church eventually after he graduated. Her name was Jennifer, amazing godly woman, and they got married, and now they have 3 kids. And what I love about that story is we're to that point in life where I'm starting to realize that when we minister to people like Chuck, it's not just Chuck's life that is being impacted. It's now kids that have been introduced into this world through that experience at 180, who probably never would have been born, who are now growing up with 2 godly parents. They live in Arizona now. Super jealous of them, but I love to go visit them.
Yeah.
And she works, kind of on the mission field at an Indian reservation, teaching.
Okay.
He has a fantastic job in the food industry, and they're part of a church, and their life is just thriving. And so I use that story as an example that it's not just one life that we're impacting. It's literally generations that, and this firsthand, that you're impacting and seeing. So I love those stories, because those kids who Jen and Chuck have had now, they didn't know the old Charles Hensley. They just know who he is today and what he represents, and I love that. I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
So
Yes, we have a lot of our listeners out there who get inspired by these stories that we tell, but they always,
mhm,
I think there's a fear between them, because they know that God has something planned for them. And so how does a person, I mean, you had a situation, that defining moment where you just, God, revealed to you 180, and even though it wasn't called 180, but it was,
yeah,
your calling. How do you think is the best way for people to overcome that fear of doing what God has called for them? And how do they
mhm,
get that given to them? How do they
yeah.
realize what God wants them to do?
You know, I think finding that I always call it a burden. And what I mean by that is, passions, they come and go. Like, I get passionate, October, November, I get passionate about deer hunting, October, I love the Dallas Cowboys. I get passionate about the Cowboys, So, I mean,
Yeah.
passions in life, there's an ebb and flow, they come and go, right? But a burden is something that to me never leaves.
Okay.
It's a thing, if I didn't wake up and come to work at 180 and do what I do, it would hurt me. There's that burden, there's that weight. Um, to me, that's a difference between a passion and a burden, and so I think helping people identify what that burden in life is, what that one thing is that breaks their heart that you know they need to be involved with, um if you didn't do what you did, I imagine that would be a burden, and there's times the easy part is identifying that burden. uh the hard part is doing something about it and sticking with it. There's been many times where um I've wanted to quit and walk away. I can't tell you how many times that moment, I've been, I've had knives held to my throat, with people who 100% had the intention to kill me, And I remember walking down to the river one day after that experience happened. I'm just like, God, I'm done with it. I don't care if this thing is my burden or not. I'm done with it. And I remember, I wish I could tell you God audibly spoke to me. That's never happened, but I just felt like God saying, I've never given up on you. So why are you giving up on me? And so, and it was that burden that helped me through that moment, and if it would have just been a passion, I would have been done, and over it. So I think finding that burden, and I think whether it's working with kids, or domestic abuse violence, or orphans, or third world countries, or whatever it is, but that thing that really weighs on your heart, that would hurt you if you didn't do it. To me, that's how you identify that mission and that purpose we talked about earlier, and uh, and then sticking with it, like I said, is the difficult part.
Yeah. One of the things that we kind of, I guess we use it as a tool to help people in their discipleship program. It's called the abiding cycle. And what
Hmm.
that is seeking God's will, obeying God's will, learning through that experience, and then experiencing God through this cycle. And then once you kind of experience God and you see his goodness and he has good plan for you, then you'll seek his will again. So it's in a cycle that we all go through, but it's that abiding, it's that obeying part
Yeah,
of that 4-part cycle that people have the hardest part. They might realize what their God is calling them to do, but to obey it, it can be very
yeah,
difficult
yeah.
at time. It's because it's
Oh,
scary at
100%.
times.
It is, yeah. 100%. No, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
So,
So how would you suggest to someone to kind of apply what I call a mission focused life? um, Staying committed, having that focus, letting
mhm,
the passion kind of ebb and flow, but kind of get rid of that. How would you recommend to people
yeah,
to how to live this ongoing? It's more of a lifestyle of mission rather than uh, here and there.
yeah. Um, so I think a big part of this is, I would break it down to maybe two categories. One is accountability. Um, having people in your life, surrounded by people, keeps you grounded in principles that are highly important. Um, but two, it also keeps you accountable to that mission and purpose. I remember those times where I've wanted, even recently, as a couple of years ago. The people who were closest to me were the people who were saying, "Hey, you may feel like this might be a low right now, but we know you, and we know that you're called to this and have a burn for it, and let us help you get you through this moment." And so I think you have to have that accountability in your life to help you get through those lows, and also help you keep you accountable to that mission, and to that focus. It might be, people who love going on missions. I have a great friend of mine who, 3, 4 times a year, his mission, his purpose is to go to Mexico and build a house with the nonprofit called Casas por Cristo. And it's awesome, but there's been times where financially it's like, I can't do that, and so he needed people, that accountability in his life to say, hey, let's pray for this, let's believe in this, that this is going to happen. And it always does. And so I think accountability is good, and I think experience is good. Look, I mean, this is a touchy subject, but it's easy to fall into this American dream life of ours, where we're just spoiled and basically kind of oftentimes attain whatever we want to obtain. But we have real issues and real struggles in communities, whether that be overseas or here, and downpoured out my door right here.
Right.
But if no one is willing to have those experiences, if no one's willing to come down here and walk on one of these sidewalks or hear gunshots or talk to these kids who, are growing up in tough situations, or go overseas and, on a missions trip, or, ride an orphan, or whatever the situation is, if you aren't willing to have those experiences, oftentimes you'll just get sucked into your middle class life where things are good, go to Target, go to work, and life's good, but there's you have to have those experiences in life. And so and you need those constant. We live in such a world, again, that this American dream is pulling us into, and I'm just as guilty. I live it every day. I come down here almost every day of the week. I'm down here and I see it, but I still get sucked into that world. And so if it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. So I think you have to constantly be forcing yourself to have those experiences to keep you on mission and keep you target and on focus.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's very good insight. Appreciate you as a guest, but I'm going to give you an opportunity now to kind of share with our listeners any places they can go to get more information on 180, maybe ways they could volunteer or support, or where would they go to get more information on what all the good work that you guys are doing?
So a lot of our stuff is done through social media, and so you can, look up 180, and it's always spelled out ONEEIGHTY. If you, so Twitter, Instagram, Facebook is our main social media platform. We use them all, but, every day we're putting out stories and content. We realize over 350 volunteers every month. So there's so many volunteer opportunities. The great thing is, whether you want to work with adults or you want to work with kids or addictions or in the schools, we have so many different opportunities for individuals and their families to get involved. Athletics, like right now we need baseball coaches, people love baseball, do something with that gift and that passion and that burden. You can teach a group of kids that have never played baseball or any organized sport in their life, and this is their only opportunity that they're going to have to do it. And so, social media is fantastic. You can always reach out to us, email. Also, our podcast is really, or not our podcast, this is your podcast. Our app is really good. Our app is, you can download, it's called 180. It has a lot of information about what we do, but it also has an interactive map of all the community resources. And so if you need help, you can also go to our app, go to the interactive map, and you can find almost 600 some resources, but here in the Quad Cities that you're able to obtain to find whatever help that you need.
Yeah. Well, you're doing some amazing work, Rusty. We appreciate everything you do. And I know we just barely touched the surface of the impact that you're having in Davenport and in the Quad City area. So we just want to say thank you. Keep up the good work, and God bless. All right.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
This has been A Mission Focused Life with Tim Olafson. Find us online at missionfocusedlife.com, as well as on Facebook at facebook.com/Mission Focused Life. You can subscribe to the video version of this show on YouTube and the audio version on Spotify, as well as anywhere you get your podcasts.